All right, good evening, everyone. I'll call to order this meeting of the Village of Germantown Board of Zoning Appeals. This meeting has been given public notice in accordance with Section 19.83 and 19.84 of the Wisconsin statutes in such form that it will apprise the general public and news media of the subject matter that is intended for consideration and action. Would our Madam Clerk call the roll, please?
Member Tim Edwards.
Here.
Member Jim Hansen. Member Christine Huber. Member Kevin Shedrun. And Chairman Barry White.
Here. All right, the first item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes from our April 13, 2022 meeting? Does anyone have any additions, changes, or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second? Motion having been made and seconded. Vote is to approve the minutes from the April 13, 2022 meeting. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries and the minutes are approved. So it looks like, welcome folks, it looks like we have two hearings today. And so what I usually try to explain to folks, and rather than having to do it separately during each of your hearings, I'll just explain it to you once. And I'll go through the procedure a little bit when we start the hearings, but it's important for you guys all to understand that at least as I understand it, our power to grant these variances is limited by the statutes, the Wisconsin law, and the ordinances of the village. And so it really has nothing to do with whether we like you or whether we understand why your variance is desirable or why it would be convenient for you. It's really just a question of those factors that are in the application that you guys filled out. So you know what those factors are, and those will be the things that we're going to be focusing on as we go through these hearings, okay? With that said, I'll give each of you an opportunity to ask any questions of me or about the process and the procedure during your particular hearing, but I just wanted to only have to say once about what our role is and what the extent of our power is. So I will now call our first hearing. First hearing relates to Patrick, is it Kumichael? Kumichael. All right. The purpose of this hearing will be to hear any and all parties, their attorneys or agents for or against a variance appeal filed by Patrick Kumichael, property owner N104W20355 Willow Creek Road in Colgate, who is requesting a variance from Section 17.41 paren 1 paren small b of the Village Zoning Code to exceed the maximum number of detached accessory buildings permitted in the RS4 Single Family Residential District. Mr. Kumichael, come on up. Yeah, right. We're very informal here. We'll make it easy and painless for you, I hope. So the way that this process works is that it's your appeal, it's your request for the variance, and so you are in charge of how you want to run this. But what we have found that's usually easier for folks in your position that have never done this before, usually what we have found is easiest is if our zoning administrator sort of goes first and lays out what the zoning code says, what the how the property is zoned, what the requirements are, and explains about the property, and then you then have the opportunity to explain why you want the variance. I'm not saying you have to do it that way, but that's usually it's usually easier for our applicants.
That's fine with me.
Okay, all right. With that said, then we'll let the zoning administrator go first. Oh, go ahead, of course.
All the paperwork
Uh-huh.
and what we filled out already, you guys all got that?
We do. We all have, yes, we all have that
That's my
packet.
only question.
Right, well, I'll swear you in. You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Can you state your name and your position with the village?
My name is Emily Zant. I'm the Associate Planner and Zoning Administrator. Okay, so the request before you today came about when the Key Michaels were issued a code violation notice in January following a complaint investigation into both poultry and the number of accessory buildings on the property. Since that time, the property owners have removed the poultry, so that's taken care of. But you do have one request before you today, which is a variance appeal from one of the zoning code provisions in the RS4 district, and that's the number of accessory buildings permitted. Section 17.41, 1B of the zoning code regulates the number and size of detached accessory buildings. The Key Michael property is zoned RS4 single family, and the RS4 single family district allows up to one detached accessory building. We have included at your desk a copy of the residential accessory use building and structures restrictions, if you want to reference that at any time. So the subject property is located on the south side of Willow Creek Road, approximately a fifth of a mile west of Appleton Avenue in the Lannon Road roundabout. This is zoomed in a little bit. You can see the property is set back. Has a long driveway that's set back behind the other houses on the south side of Willow Creek Road. Here's an aerial view looking from the east. And a more detailed area of the property if we need that. So the existing accessory building on the property include A, which is highlighted with a red A on your screen there. It's a 12 by 16 wooden shed. B, which is a 22 by 14 lean-to. And C, which is a 7 by 7 Rubbermaid shed. Zoomed into the property, you can see A and B on the left-hand side of the screen, and then the orange X is where the shed that was removed from the property was located. And then C is where an additional, that 7 by 7 Rubbermaid shed was placed. This area image is just a little old. Just some related information. This may or may not come into your decision today. But again, the RS4 district allows one detached accessory building totaling not more than 1% of the total area of the property. In this case, 1% of the property is 858 square feet total. The three existing detached accessory buildings total 549 square feet. So again, the owner is seeking a variance from section 17.411B to exceed the permitted number of accessory buildings in the RS4 single-family residential district by 2 for a total of 3 accessory buildings.
Let me ask you a couple of questions. The first relates to that Rubbermaid shed. Do our ordinances define what a detached accessory building is?
Yes, and those Rubbermaid sheds are included in that definition.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be a permanent structure. What if it was one of those sort of Rubbermaid, not a shed, but just like a chest that sits on the ground? Does that count as a detached accessory building?
I would say no.
Okay. What's because one of our considerations is the spirit of the zoning code. What's your understanding as to the limitation, the reason behind the limitation on the number of accessory buildings? in this RS, is it RS2 or RS4?
RS4. Generally, I would say in the RS4 district, the RS4 district is typically within a subdivision. The lots are smaller. In this case, the lot is larger, but still zoned RS4. The idea behind having an ordinance which allows only one detached structure would just be to limit the overall, I don't know what you would say, kind of the cleanliness of the property. You don't want a whole bunch of structures scattered out throughout the property. One structure that is limited in size.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you know when the zoning was enacted? There was discussion in the application about the age of the structures when the house was built. And I'm wondering if the zoning provision was in place when the property was purchased.
This ordinance was updated in 2012.
That set the requirement for a maximum of one. Exist prior to that?
I might have the village administrator come up, but I believe it was set prior to that.
Yep, Mr. Retzloff, do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Can you just identify yourself for the record, please?
Certainly. Jeff Retzloff, village planner and zoning administrator for the village of Germantown. I understand the question. The accessory building section of the zoning code has been modified numerous times over the 16 years that I've been here. The specific limitation on the number of structures was put in place back in 2012, as Emily indicated. However, the regulation of accessory buildings has always been part of the zoning code. Back to 1988 was the most recent comprehensive revision of the entire code. And at that time, the code had a limitation on the number of accessory buildings and the overall size. In fact, there was an actual square footage number limitation, not a percentage. So it didn't matter whether the parcel was 2 acres or a half an acre. You could only have up to, I forget the number, I think it was like 480 square feet. I do not know specifically when this property was purchased and when the buildings were constructed. Is that, I don't even know if that's part of the
I think
information.
I think 2000, we say it was purchased in 2005, and they were existing when it was purchased in 2005.
Yeah, and I don't know when they were installed.
Right,
correctly.
right.
So that may factor into your decision.
Help us understand, because in the village's letter to the Key Michaels dated April 13, 2022, it explains that since there did not seem to be any building permits for any of these structures, they would not be legally non-conforming. Help us understand what that means.
Well, I'll ask Emily to give her interpretation. I'll start by saying that if you don't pull a permit for a structure that's required to get a permit, it legally doesn't exist under our code provisions and is subject to a code violation notice.
And so if the ordinance, if this was a permitted use prior to the change, at the time it was built, but no building permit, let's assume a building permit was pulled. And then the zoning ordinance changed, that would be, or could be, a legal non-conforming use, is that right?
We would consider that to be the case.
Yeah.
Yes.
But without a building permit, then they don't get the benefit of having it already legally existed prior to the change in the ordinance, is that right?
That's my interpretation and application of the code.
Okay.
I guess the next logical question is, does one just pull a permit, after they've been sent a code violation notice and then all is good? I I don't have a good answer for that.
But wouldn't the permit be denied now?
Well, arguably, yes, it would be denied now. Yes.
You need a permit for the Rubbermaid shed?
We do require a permit for the Rubbermaid shed.
Is the Rubbermaid shed attached to the ground in any way? Like other than, I mean,
We don't specifically define a detached accessory building as falling into a temporary versus permanent category for purposes of it being used on a permanent basis. We do have provisions for temporary structures, temporary accessory buildings, but permits are required and they're specifically allowed for a predefined time period that renders them temporary. They can't just say it's a plastic construction and that somehow allows you to use it for as long as the plastic, weathers the storm and could be, multiple years, but it's still temporary. That we don't acknowledge that sort of definition of a structure. I know communities that do, but Germantown does not have a specific provision or regulation worded in that way.
Said, what if it 4x4 Rubbermaid? 7x7. Specific size.
There's not a specific size limitation. It's more or less an interpretation on our part of the code. I mean, if you come in for a container that you effectively put on your porch, we're not going to require you to get a permit for that. But if it's a structure that you physically can walk into, arguably it's not habitable in the terms that you're living in it, but that you can go into it and be under the roof within the structure itself. That for us is sort of the definition of where then you'd need a permit.
when my daughter was very little, my uncle sent her this giant plastic castle. And I had to assemble that dumb thing and it took me all afternoon, but it would have been close to 7x7. Did I need a building permit to put that thing together?
I guess arguably yes,
No kidding.
but does that make sense? Not even to me. But the way the code is currently
Yeah.
written, that's how we would.
Fair enough. I didn't get one and it's gone now. She's 17, doesn't want it anymore.
I mean, so frankly, any guidance that the board can provide in making their decision, would be helpful to.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have any questions for either of our administrators? No? All right. Okay, Mr. Keymichael or your wife, you're up and you can both talk when you want.
I just have a couple things.
Sure.
One, a long time ago, before a lot of the ordinances were passed in Germantown, if the structure or shed, they used to call them sheds, they didn't call them structures, was not permanent, there was no building permit required. And that's why I'm assuming
Did you buy the house from your grandfather? Oh, I see. Oh,
before my uncle owned the land. So I don't know if that was in the 80s, but there was no, if you didn't have a permanent structure, which was on concrete, you didn't need to pull a building permit way back then.
so at some point, the parcel that the house sits on had this other land added to it.
Correct. This
All right.
right here,
Yeah.
and this way was the acre, I think it was an acre. And then when they were gonna sell it, put it up for sale, my grandfather gave them this. So then this became part of their property. And the Rubbermaid shed, right there that's behind the pine trees and no one can see is a Rubbermaid bin. And I think I wrote in there, we put it up to keep the yard looking nice and put our stuff in there. I could just put plastic cans all over my yard, 5 or 6 of them, but I try to keep things so they look nice, right? We try to upgrade our properties, but do you have any questions? I think.
Well, yeah, I've got a couple, and I'm sure that other people will as well. It's just. Oh, yeah, very good, thank you. Would you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I should have asked you this before we got started. If you would just state your name and address for the record, please.
Patrick T. Michael, North 104, West 20355, Willow Creek Road, Colgate 53017.
Thank you. So the two, not the Rubbermaid structure for the pool, the other two buildings, describe what their use is.
Uh,
Okay, so that's just like firewood? Okay. Is,
The other one is the lean-to is for wood, four-wheeler, chainsaws, stuff like that. And the other one is for tractors and snow blowers.
you're right, yeah, you've got enough square footage. Is there any way you could combine these two? I don't know what they physically look like, but you've got enough square footage that if you somehow attached that lean-to the other one, I wonder if that would count as one building, and then we only got to worry about the pool accessories.
I've thought about that.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure for lack of a better word, what hoops I'm gonna have to jump through. I mean, can I put a breezeway across there and call them attached?
Yeah, I don't know.
Do I have to build? The lean-to is not like a weather-tight.
Right. Is it permanently attached to the ground?
It's got posts that are in the ground a little.
In the ground,
bit.
yeah, okay.
It could be
Yeah,
moved, I guess.
I don't know. I'm just thinking. All right, does anybody,
The other shed too is just sitting on gravel because if they would have poured a foundation, it would have been a permanent structure. And then they would have had to pull a permit back.
oh, I see, okay, yeah. Yeah.
So I think I read earlier that the land immediately to the west is not buildable. Is that?
No, this is all agriculture farmland back here. I'm not sure where the floodplain is, but I would highly doubt you can build here with the floodplain. I mean, it's wet. When it rains, yeah, I think the floodplain line is in here. So with setbacks, I don't think you'd be able to build there.
The west.
Pardon me?
In theory, to the west, it's agriculture now.
Yeah, some of it's ag, but there are spots here that are wet year round. So I don't know if that would be buildable or if they would delineate some of that as, even though it's on a high ground, it's delineated as wetland. I'm not sure. It's a emergency airstrip according to the FAA. It's still privately owned by whoever owns the land. Pardon? The owner of the land is the guy in the corner.
Okay. They just have an easement on his land?
It's no easement, it's just listed as a emergency landing strip. Yeah, Willow Creek Airport. It's my grandfather flew the plane.
Hang on a sec. Mrs. Key Michael, if you'll come up, just let me swear you in for a second. No, it's all right. I forgot to do it until she told me. Do you solemnly swear testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Absolutely.
Can you state your name and address for the record as well?
Ann Kelly Key Michael. I live at North 104, West 20355, Willow Creek Road. I live
Thanks.
with property. That picture is old. Our We don't have that pile of wood there anymore.
But you were going to tell us about
Airstrip.
this emergency airstrip.
So this is, I think I have paperwork on it, but it is a registered landing strip. Whoever owns this property.
Can you take the mic with you? Thanks.
Yes.
We're
Whoever-
we broadcast over the internet now because of COVID, and so people otherwise won't be able to hear you. And if anybody's watching, I don't know that anybody ever really
Actually,
watches.
there's
but,
tons of people out there.
Right.
This is the property owner of the 10 acres, and this is it goes this way into here. This is the emergency landing strip. It's the Willow Creek Airport. It's currently, people do need permission to land on it, but Grandpa had a hangar right here, and that's where he would fly his Piper Cub out of. So that's what kind of makes the property very unique, is that this is a 100-year floodplain, and it's a FAA-approved landing airstrip. So there's really not anyone who can see from this angle the sheds. They can't see from this angle the sheds, because here's Willow Creek. There is no view. Unless you're on Gloria's property, you could possibly see through the tree line. This is a huge tree line. You can't really see through there. And the renters here, I don't know. Well, they could see it from here, I suppose. But yeah.
For either of the Key Michaels, and I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to give you an opportunity to explain in case I'm missing something. Is there anything unique about your particular land? You've explained what's unique in that regard, but is there anything unique that requires you to have more than one accessory building? If you had instead, had these things not already existed and you were going to build one, and you came to the village and said, we want to build an accessory building, and they said, okay, well, you've got 800 and some square feet, and you said, well, I only need 6, and you were going to, is there any reason you couldn't just build one building if these didn't already exist?
We could, but I think when,
Yeah, okay, right. Yeah.
We have 2 acres and we have a garden and we're rural area. We have things that we need that, you can't fit
Sure.
everything in your garage that you need to take care of 2 acres of land. And
No, I don't doubt that. All right. Anyone?
it's not a personal hardship, but I think what it is, it's uniquely burdensome if you look at all the process and all the time that's going to take down the sheds that we currently have when they're under the square footage that we would be allowed, and pull all the permits and build up potentially an 858 square foot shed. So that's what I think is unique about it, is that it could be potentially burdensome in the future. But
Okay. Yep.
yeah, and it's our oversight, the Rubbermaid shed, didn't really think of calling or asking for a permit. Never thought of it. It's our oversight. I own it, but it does keep our yard nice and neat. I got a drone and I could show you a picture of it. Now looks wonderful compared to this picture, but yeah.
Anybody have any more questions for Mr. or Mrs. Key Michael? No? Go ahead. No, please.
Discussed already, but, and the other 2, they were there when you purchased.
But there's something, right? Yeah.
Issue here.
It's perhaps. Mr. Retzloff, can you come back up? Or Ms., I'm sorry, Emily, I'm blanking on your last name at the moment.
Zant. Emily Zant.
Zant, I knew that. Does it sound correct that there was a time when structures that weren't permanently attached to the real estate did not require a building permit?
It's certainly conceivable.
Okay.
Not having been here for more than 16 years,
Yeah.
I couldn't speak to how my predecessor, zoning administrator, and/or the building officials, building inspectors enforced the various codes for the village. So it's conceivable.
Yeah.
At some point, however, the village decided that they were going to require permits and put limitations on the number of buildings. I think as Emily pointed out, that it's driven by the desire to avoid clutter on properties, and more specifically, the RS4 district in this case, it's in, that district is intended for smaller lot subdivisions.
Right.
And is typically assigned to that way. In this case, because of the way the code is structured, this property, given its size, fell into the RS4 zoning district and was assigned to the property back, I don't even know exactly when, sometime in, I'm sorry? It was rezoned in 2002? Okay.
What are the lot size requirements for RS4? Or what's the minimum?
The minimum is 20,000 square feet.
It's half an acre, roughly, a little less?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no maximum. The next zoning district with the larger parcel size requirement is the RS2 district. It has a 2 acre. RS3 is 1 acre requirement, and then RS2 has a 2 acre requirement.
So typically when the village code is amended, wouldn't things that are not in compliance that already exist be grandfathered in?
If they're legal, yes.
So it gets back to the issue that we think that there was no building permit when these were originally
Correct.
built. Like, what year would they have been originally built,
We'll get you.
roughly? Like, you know?
Well, do you know, well, do you know the answer to the question? Oh, was she asking you?
Well,
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Just jump up to the mic if you would. Do you know?
when were these-
Could have been, not sure exactly the day or the year that my uncle bought the property, but I know I was in high school, it was in the 80s, early 80s, so they were there before that.
And we have records of building permits going
Here-
back to the 80s?
Here's the thing, when my grandfather built, he built an airplane hangar, which is obviously a permanent structure, he pulled a permit. When he put the addition on his house in 1964, which was a permanent structure, because I checked this out, the permit's in there. I don't know, that's the only information I could find on the
Yeah.
property.
So I guess to your question and Mr. Retzloff's point that, that they would be grandfathered in this legal non-conforming use if they were legal at the time they were built, but we know there wasn't, we're pretty sure there wasn't a building permit, but Mr. Keymichael's position and testimony is that then you didn't need a building permit for these non-permanent structures, and that every time his grandfather bought a permanent structure, he pulled a permit. And Mr. Retzloff just doesn't know one way or the other whether that's a correct statement of the Germantown code at the time these would have been built.
I mean, in theory, we must have.
Well, yeah, right. Although actually,
But
would
I-
that be a question of, would that be just a sort of a question of interpretation that the zoning administrator would it ever specifically say you don't need a building permit if it's not a permanent structure, or anything like that, that would give specific guidance to the administrator at the time?
Well, it certainly could have
Yeah.
been, but in our case, it wasn't. Thus, the reason for making the changes that we've made over the last 16 years, in each time, we're further clarifying what the specific provisions are and what they mean. For example, the most recent change was adding the provision dealing with temporary being a time period, structure and permit requirements and setback requirements for that. I mean, arguably, going back to what you said earlier, questioning about, such a small shed, why would that need a permit? Or does something so small need a permit? Well, I know this sounds strange, but if you only needed a permit if you had a structure that was 200 square feet or larger, then everybody would just build 180 square foot structures and have 10 of them on their property to get the space that they need for whatever they needed. And to sort of get out ahead of that potential, granted, it's not likely, but there's a potential, the board approved a code change that sets some minimum requirements. If we need to further clarify permanent versus temporary in terms of the material composition of a structure, or whether it just sits on some skids versus on a foundation built into the ground, then we'll have to make that interpretation.
Yeah, well,
I mean, it
to
gets
my
back to
way of
the-
thinking, and it didn't have to do with size as much as it did my sort of common sense view of the word building. When you talk about a building permit, when I snap together pieces of plastic to create a castle for my 5-year-old daughter, I didn't think I was building anything. The same way if I put a tent up in my yard, I don't think I'm building anything, but it sounds like maybe I need a temporary permit.
Sometimes what seems reasonable to most people, it's a
Yeah.
loophole to somebody else. I mean, we deal with people who use vehicles as means of storage space. And right now, we don't have a specific
Yeah.
regulation that says you can't use your car as a storage structure, but we have people who do that. And we have others who then complain about it. So do
Sure.
we need to have a coffee is hot type provision in our zoning code? Maybe one day we will, for every possible loophole that somebody might find
no,
or
it just-
use
yeah.
to.
Yeah. That was the crux of my question. I just wanted to make sure it didn't have anything to do with size. I totally understand your point about size. Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Retzloff or Ms. Zant? Go ahead.
Do we have a picture of this particular structure?
It is, oh, there it is. It is a roof with 2 sides, and the back is open like fence lattice, and the front is open. There's a gate on it. I was gonna put a gate on the front just to open and close it and to make it so it looked nicer, but I stopped when all this happened. But basically, it's just the open air.
We're sort of dealing with that right now, with like pavilions. We're getting more and more of that, people putting in their backyards, basically a roof structure on 4 posts. And does that qualify? We've sort of, at this point, where my interpretation is that if it has at least one side to it or 2 sides to it, that would be more of a structure that we would regulate as an accessory building, as opposed to just sort of a landscape feature like a pergola or something that holds vines and that sort of thing. Or I don't know all the terms of these various things, but it's getting more and more complicated.
Mhm.
Oh, that's why I asked this.
Right.
Consider structure. Sheet metal around it. Side of the sheet. That's what I'm kind of. Seems like it's.
Well, typically a lean-to is a roof structure attached to an existing building that just sort of extends the weather-protected space in some fashion. And that too is a constant challenge for us. when people put up the minimum or the maximum size building they can get, and then they add another roof here and something off the back. And I'm not saying that's the case here, but yes. We'll probably be back soon with more definitions, not before you, but if you provide guidance to us and want us to look into specific code changes as a result of the things that come before you, not necessarily just as a result of this situation, but, you know, feel free to give that direction to us and we'll look into that. Typically, things that come before you multiple times are kind of a sign that it's time to maybe do something to the code to make it clearer to understand or make a change to reflect changes in how people use their property and how what structures are made of.
Mr. Keymichael, come back up.
If it was zoned R2, I could have 2, correct?
I don't have that committed to memory, but I'm sure you'd get more.
R2 is, what size are R2 though? R2 is is at least,
intended to
is at least an
provide-
acre though, right?
Pardon?
Oh, 2 acres.
2 acres.
Oh, 2 acres.
Not to exceed 0.5 dwellings per net acre.
Yeah.
So it couldn't be more than 1 dwelling per acre. So I would be allowed to be in
Do you have 2
RS2?
acres?
Huh? 1.973. I mean, if I have to buy 2 inches from the farmer, I will.
Surprise.
But right, yeah.
But I'm just saying, I could be rezoned
That's true.
RS2,
If
correct?
you were in that zoning district, yes.
So your rubber, go ahead.
So I was just I mean, that's a if this is going to turn into a big, whatever it's going to turn into, it could just be rezoned RS2. And then we wouldn't have an issue with those 2 sheds. Or
How difficult of a process is that? To get it rezoned?
Well, in this case, acquisitions of a small piece of additional property to get the 2 acres and apply for rezoning. If it was rezoned in 2002, I'm sure why that issue wasn't discussed back then.
I can explain that.
Yeah, go ahead.
My uncle said when they gave him that piece of land, that I'm not sure if you guys were on the board or if it was a different board, but they basically told him if he rezoned it RS4, I guess they didn't want him building a pole barn or something. They said, we don't want you building a pole barn, a big structure. And they said, you can rezone it RS4. That's what my uncle told me. I don't know if there's any truth to that or if that's,
I was not here back
yeah.
then.
So I don't know, but I don't know why it wasn't rezoned RS2. And 4 is, again, this is predominantly rural,
Mm-hmm.
not serviced by municipal sewer and water, right? Where RS4 is serviced by municipal water and sewer, but we're not.
Oh.
So according to the legalities of all the codes, we should have never been allowed to be RS4.
Hmm.
Right?
That's not necessarily true.
That's
As
what
I,
it says.
that's what it says the intent is for new properties that are created, that they fit into those categories based on availability of sewer and water services and size. In your case, much like some other parcels in the neighborhood, I believe that the zoning districts were assigned based on the area, like that had the higher priority, if you will, in terms of what district are we going to put this in. And it sounds like there was some discussion about the size and what would be allowed to be constructed in terms of an accessory building anyway, in the course of discussing what district to
Mhm.
put you in back in 2002? Is that
I
2002?
think so. I've been just reading on what they had and it says, and served by municipal water and sewer.
That's the intention of the code.
But it doesn't matter. I mean, just the intent, but it will go around it or do whatever.
Well,
we have to do.
I can't say what was in the mind of the board who decided what to zone your
Yeah.
property, but I'm guessing based on what I've seen elsewhere in the village is that zoning districts were assigned to property based on their parcel size almost exclusively, regardless of whether they had the water and sewer. The intention is that going forward, new developments with small lots, 20,000 square foot lots or approximately, would be served by water and sewer.
Okay. You see where I'm going?
Yeah, I see.
All right. Anyone else have questions for, you can stay up here just for a sec. For Mr. or Mrs. Keymichael. Anyone else have any questions for our zoning administrators? All right. Mr. Keymichael, anything else that you would like to tell us at this point?
I think we
Okay.
know everything.
I know I'm obsessed by this Rubbermaid shed. Do you leave it up all winter?
Yeah.
Or does it come down?
And there's, I mean, maybe I have to, I'm not.
I'm
there's
just asking what you intend. I just don't, I'm having a hard time picturing. I'm just thinking it's the thing you go and buy at Walmart and then just snap it
it's like
together.
Tupperware.
Yeah.
Snapped it together and
Yeah.
I just bought it last year, literally.
Yeah.
There's-
They have nothing, they don't have an ordinance for it yet,
Yeah.
but I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
So,
Complete oversight.
yeah. Oh, who knew? Right. All right. Anything else you want to tell us right now, Mrs. Keymichael? We're getting to the end. This isn't the absolute end.
Let me look
I'll
at
give
my
you one more
notes.
chance.
They rezoned it May 13th of 2002
2002. Okay.
from RS1 to RS4. Look at my notes here. Mhm. In the 17 years we've lived in the property, never a complaint on our land. I think that's worth noting. We just ask that, I put together some potential asks, consider grandfathering us in because those two sheds were there. And we really have no control over. We also ask you to allow us to keep the shed because that was an oversight, but yet it does keep our property clean. And I don't anticipate putting millions of sheds on our property either. That's not how we are. We'd like you to consider the unnecessary burdensome that it would cost all parties to consider, us taking down things, reapplying for permits, and then building another shed, which is going to be bigger than what we have right now, which is well under the 858 square feet we're allowed.
864.
The sheds are not a public nuisance. Nobody, like I said, nobody can see them. Our neighbors across Willow Creek have come over and, one today and said, you can't see them from Willow Creek Road. Our property is set back far enough that you can't see them. So they're not a public nuisance or even a safety risk. Unless you get yourself in the shed and it's hot that day. I mean, but it's public, it's private land, so nobody would be able to get in the shed. It's locked. And so there's no harm as far as safety goes. So I would ask you to consider that. Thankfully. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. We do have a couple of letters that were submitted regarding this request. I'm going to read those into the record. The first is dated April 29, 2022 from Brett and Mary. Oh, you guys are here? Oh, okay. I'm going to give you a chance to talk too if you want, but I'll read your letter. We are writing this letter regarding the property adjacent to ours. We have no concerns or issues with the shed, pool, Rubbermaid shed, or any structures on their property. The structures in question are not visible, nor do they bother us. Please feel free to contact us with any questions or concerns. We have another letter from Sharon Bray, dated, I'm sorry? Bay? Oh, I'm sorry. Dated 5/1/2022. I, Sharon Bay, North 104, West 20387, Willow Creek Road. I have no problem with the shed. I cannot see them from my house. I have lived here since 1989, and they have been there all that time. They cause me no harm. The pool shed is brand new and keeps the pool area neat. And we have a final letter from Gloria Nye? I do not have any problem with Patrick's shed on the east side of my property. I would rather he keeps his yard neat and things put away than all over the place. Patrick is a very good neighbor. I don't understand all this harassment. Well, all right. So now is the time at our hearing. We're separate from the letters. If anyone wants to come up and speak in favor of the request, they are welcome to do so. Either of you want to add anything? If you would please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Will you state your name and address for our record, please?
My name is John Wesky. I live at North 104 West 20255 Willow Creek Road in Colgate, Wisconsin, 53017. And I'm the house, the bottom of the screen with the brown roof. So prior to the other neighbor buying all that, this was kind of like a park, and everybody was either related or had been there forever, all friends and whatever. So I've been, in the back over there, whatever. It's always been there since I moved in 02, I think. And it's not a problem. It's not a nuisance. It's better with it than without it, because otherwise there'd be tractors and firewood and implements and things laying around. So it just pretty much fits.
Okay, thank you. Come on up. If you would raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Will you repeat your name and address for our record, please?
My name is Pretzel Horpitz, North 104, West 20295, Will Creek Road, Colgate, 53017. Basically, I'm the middle home. I purchased a property. Basically, it was his grandpa's property at one time. Then I purchased that, and in 2002, and built in 2005. And I have known that those structures have been there since that period of time, and we never had any issues with anything of whatever Patrick has done and so forth. And like I say, we're neighbors and never had any issues.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Anyone else wants to speak in favor? All right. Is there anyone else who wants to speak opposed to the request? Is there anyone else who wants to be heard on the request, but neither in favor nor opposed? Is there anybody online who wants to say anything? All right. All right. Well, I'm getting very close to closing our hearing, and so I'll give our board members one last chance. Anybody got any final questions for anybody? Any of our witnesses? Go ahead.
The property is sold.
Unlike other communities, the Village of Germantown doesn't require a code compliance inspection prior to the sale of property. So something like this wouldn't be caught, so to speak, at the time of a property sale. Only if somebody were to make inquiry or file a complaint, would it be likely brought to the attention of the village. Or if the applicant themselves came and said, I want a permit for building number 5, and we ask questions and find, well, you can't have this many buildings. So to answer your question, no, the sale of the property wouldn't necessarily reveal this sort of code violation.
Any other questions for any of our witnesses? All right. Mr. and Mrs. Keymichael, this is the point at which, if there's anything else that you thought of that you want to tell us, otherwise what's going to happen, I'm going to close the hearing, and that's going to be the end of the evidence, and then we'll begin our deliberation. So this is kind of, last call for anything else that you want to tell us. I don't know that there would be, but I don't want to foreclose that possibility. Anything else? Okay. All right. Well, then I'll just declare the hearing closed, and we can begin our deliberations. As we always do, we have to consider the 5 things that we consider. The first is whether or not the variance will or will not be contrary to the public interest and will or will not be in accord with the spirit of the zoning code. Anybody have any thoughts on that one? I'll tell you, my thought is, if anybody wants me to go first, is that I think that, as Ms. Zant pointed out, the rationale for the limitation on the number of accessory buildings is so that you don't have a cluttered yard. But since these buildings, with the possible exception of the pool shed, and even that, are not viewable from the street, and they're set back and they're tucked into the woods, I don't think that these buildings run afoul of what this zoning code is intending to protect, and therefore I would say a variance is not contrary to the spirit of the zoning code.
Yeah, so.
All right. Next, we have to consider whether there are exceptional, extraordinary, or unusual conditions or circumstances that apply specifically to this lot or parcel or use or structure or intended use that don't apply generally to other property or uses in the same district. What's your thoughts on that?
In my mind is the evidence discussion that it's possible that those structures are in place and didn't need a permit many years ago. So whether that's true or not, discuss. So whether it's really, that really would be considered to be exceptional or extraordinary.
Yeah. That's a good point. I'm just kind of thinking out loud on that if these were legal uses back at the time, then they would be considered non-conforming now and would be okay. The question is whether or not we needed a permit. They needed a permit back at the time. We know there wasn't one, but we don't have any. We have the homeowner's testimony that you didn't need one. And his grandfather did get permits when he needed them. That's at least his testimony. Mr. Retzloff's testimony was that it's conceivable that was an interpretation, but he doesn't know for sure. So whether that is sufficient evidence for anybody to think it's extraordinary or exceptional. The other thing that occurs to me is that this is a really big parcel for RS4, right? And so I wonder if that wouldn't be an unusual condition. Or that the parcel was combined. Right. Right. Yeah, so we know that. Yeah, because they were on the property when it was combined. So that gets what does that do for that doesn't help them on the pool shed.
Well, that's where, there is kind of a different fact pattern with the pool shed versus the other 2 sheds.
Right.
And I don't know if we can grant a variance only for the older sheds versus the green shed.
I think we can. I mean, I think we have, I think we have the power to do that. I think we have the power to say there's nothing extraordinary about the, I think we can separate them if you guys want. And we could conclude, I'm not suggesting this is what I think, but we could conclude that while there is something unusual and extraordinary with respect to the two in the back, there's nothing unusual and extraordinary with respect to the pool shed.
Yeah, because I think as far as exceptional or extraordinary circumstances, you know, I think for the two older ones, there's the lack of clarity on what the rules, you know, even were at the time that they were built and whether they were conforming at that time or not. And then also, I think it's just unusual that this property is RS4, you know, given that RS4 is normally a property in a subdivision. I guess that would apply to the Rubbermaid shed as well as the older sheds. So, yeah, I guess that exceptional circumstance would apply to all of them. Because it's, you know, I know it's not quite all the way to the RS2, being at 1.97 acres, but.
Well, it
Well,
doesn't matter what the application says. If the application says they want to exceed one, that's maybe different than if the application says they want three.
Right. Well, it would seem to me that if we were to grant a variance, the variance we grant cannot be, all right, you can exceed one, which would give them sort of a blank check to have as many as they want. I think we have to scope whatever it is we're going to allow, and it would seem to me that our variance, if we grant it, should specify these structures, right? We don't want to say you can have 3 structures. If we were to grant it, we would say you can have these 3 structures, right? Because if we say 3, then, you know, they take down the pool shed and build another, something else that we haven't had a chance to talk about or consider. So that's what, Mr. Hansen's right, that's the request, but I think our ultimate decision has to be more precise than that.
I read the application, it's just exceed one. I'm the one who says to exceed by 2.
Right. Yeah. Well, have we reached a consensus on extraordinary? Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the only one on the Rubbermaid one to me would be it being RS4 when it's not in a subdivision, it's.
And even if, like, if it were, let's say RS2, but which is brought up, we're still only limited to 2 buildings. It still would not be in compliance.
Right. I'm certainly. I'm just so troubled that the Rubbermaid structure is a structure.
That is definitely what I'm struggling with myself.
Accessory building is defined as a separate building, the use of which is purely incidental to that of the principal building. Building is defined as a structure having a roof and intended for the shelter, housing, or enclosure of persons, animals, or chattels. Chattels are just things. So it's a shelter having a roof intended for the shelter of things. I guess it's a building.
It is.
I guess it's a building. That's crazy.
With no size requirement put on
Right.
it. As long as it has a roof,
If it has a roof,
stuff in it, it's a,
and it's, yeah, and it's a separate building, the use of which is purely incidental to that of the principal building. So it is that. And maybe my daughter's Princess Castle was not, because it wasn't sheltering any person or animal or thing. I don't know. I'm just
sheltering
freaked
is-
out that I was supposed to get a, anyway. All right, well. So there's exceptional, we're kind of got a consensus on that one, at least with respect to the first two. Is the variance necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights possessed by other properties in the same district?
That one I struggle with a little bit more because they could build one structure that's quite a bit larger to have all the storage they want. And
Right.
you asked the question, which is always in my mind, was there a way for them to build something that's in conformance with the zoning? Or is there something so unusual about the lot that it prevents something to be built in compliance with the zoning?
Right?
So this one is a hard one for me.
I think this is the hardest one. I mean, there's obviously, it's for their convenience, and it's desirable, and it's better than having some great big thing, and it makes the house look better than when, the yard look better than all the stuff just strewn about, but is it necessary?
I don't think that,
Convenient, yes.
Yeah.
Necessary, maybe it's a different
Problem.
question.
I don't think it's necessary because they have room, the lot size is there, they could build something that is compliant to today's codes to maintain enjoyment of the property, right? You could build one shed that we talked about that's larger and still keep all your things in it. So it doesn't feel like this variance is necessary for them to be able to have that same property right.
Well, let me throw this out there for discussion. That yeah, this is obviously the hardest one. But if we thought that the first two structures, if we have no reason to think that the first two structures needed a permit when they were built, and therefore they were legal when they were built, and therefore anybody else would have them considered a non-conforming use. Is this variance necessary to give them the functional equivalent of the non-conforming use that other property owners would be entitled to, the grandfather clause? Just a thought. I think that, yeah, I think this is a real hard one. I'm just,
Yeah,
you can
so-
tell what I'm doing.
so I guess you're saying it's necessary for the preservation of the property right to have your grandfathered items not be
Yeah,
taken away from you.
if we,
You have to have evidence that other properties are in the same condition that have legal non-conforming structures, won't you?
Well, I think-
Grandfathered items.
Comparing to other properties in the same district, are there other properties that have that same situation that you're trying to be consistent with?
Yeah, but say you have a building that's RS or that was built in the 1800s and has a barn on it and a milk house and a chicken coop and all that, and you're at a couple thousand square feet on 2 acres. That's grandfathered from the 1800s or early 1900s when building permits weren't even thought of. So how could you go back and try to compare that apples to apples?
Yeah, I don't know. I think we are in agreement, I think, that there's nothing extraordinary, so number 2 on the pool shed, or necessary for preservation on the pool shed, right? Don't we think that, yeah, right?
Yep.
Yeah, but I guess I'm just working through the logic of preserving the right to, have grandfathered items or items that, you can't prove right now
Right.
definitively what the rules were at the time they were built.
Right. I mean, the,
The doubt, if we can't prove that, here's the code from
right.
1980, that says you should have had a permit.
Language says, the enjoyment of substantial property rights enjoyed, or enjoyment of substantial property rights possessed by other properties in the same district, so focus on that, then how are we comparing it to other properties in the district?
Well, other properties in the district that had something built before the change in the zoning code that was legal would be grandfathered in. And they wouldn't have needed a permit and they wouldn't need a variance. But since we don't have proof, since the building, since zoning isn't going to give them that non-conforming use apparently, or consider it a non-conforming use because they don't know that those structures were legal to begin with. The question is whether the variance then is necessary to, in effect, give them that which other people would be entitled to. And I guess that turns on whether we think for sure that there was, these were legal structures. And so the testimony we have on that is the homeowners. Now he's testifying as, this is your point, he's testifying as to what the law was, and you would think one could look that up. But Mr. Retzloff didn't contradict that. He said it's possible. I don't know. I think that could go either way.
As we talked about it more, maybe coming to the side of that it is necessary.
Yep.
Because there was no proof that that a permit was needed.
Mm-hmm.
So other properties that would be in the same condition, this would be making it consistent with that. Otherwise, we're holding them to a different standard.
If you,
Right. That's the hard part.
yeah.
I think the burden of proof should be on the village that, it was non-conforming when it was built, or it was needed a permit when it was built.
That probably does seem a little more fair. They're more in control of that. The ability to prove that is easier for the village than a homeowner,
Right.
right? Well, all right. Do we want to move on to number 4? Variance will or will not create substantial detriment to adjacent property, will or will not be contrary to public safety or interest.
I don't think it will. Seems like the majority of the neighbors are here and they don't have an issue with it.
Right.
Public safety, you can't really see what the issue would be. Well,
No.
Right. Agree.
And finally, a literal enforcement of the terms of the zoning code would or would not result in practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship to the appellant applicant. I think this is another tough one, to be honest with you.
I don't think it causes unnecessary hardship. And I think that's some testimony we heard too. Practical difficulty, I think, is more questionable.
We've always had the ones in front of us that are, the question always is, what is hardship? Hardship could be because of the type of lot it is, or it's not necessarily because, well, I don't want to take it down and have to build something new because it's gonna cost me money, or
Right.
for that reason, it's been accepted as not a definition of hardship. So that's why this was a hard one too.
Yeah, the purely financial stuff, I think the code itself says that just money doesn't count as an unnecessary hardship. A practical difficulty.
And the testimony of the owner was that, yes, they could do it. They don't want to. Rather use the structures that are there already.
Anybody got an argument on this one?
Well, I mean, it would be a practical difficulty. I think if they have to tear the two sheds down and build something new, seems rather impractical to me.
Yeah, regardless of the financial
Or to
aspect of it. Yeah.
Figure out some way to turn two buildings into one,
Right.
you know, that seems kind of impractical.
This was a real small lot, and it was really hard to build something. I think it was really, it would be hard and impractical. And just the size of the lot is so large, there's a lot of space. It just seems like there's a lot of room to do something if they felt like they wanted to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's just hard, you know, how you define practical difficulty, you know.
Mhm.
Obviously, it's work to, you know, have to change it, but
That's what makes these hard, because the convenience thing and the testimony, it's just always, isn't always easy to agree with it based on that.
Mhm. Well, there's certainly right, there's certainly difficulty and hardship. It's whether it's practical difficulty and unnecessary hardship. Even if you don't talk about money, it's inconvenience,
yeah,
you
it's
know.
a lot of work.
A lot of
to
work.
Figure out how to reconfigure two sheds into one, or,
Right. So then maybe, I think Mr. Hanson sometimes makes this argument on unnecessary, whether, you know, if we think that it's that if we otherwise think the factors so heavily favor a variance, and I'm not saying we think that it heavily favors a variance, but if we did, and isn't kind of any hardship unnecessary hardship when you're so, if it was so otherwise, I don't know. I don't know. This is tough.
Well, I think I'm stuck on would not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the same position, leading that direction.
Give me just a second. I'm looking back at the code about the financial thing. Necessary hardship.
I guess, you know, I just look at a literal enforcement of the terms of the zoning code. So if we literally enforced it and said, nope, you got to get rid of those two sheds. I mean, I think that would be a practical difficulty for them. And
For something that's been in place for 25, 30, 35, however many years.
right,
And try to,
you know, unnecessary hardship.
How do you answer this
Let's
one?
analyze every word unnecessary. Like, I mean, it does seem unnecessary when it's not bothering anyone.
Are you enforcing the zoning code if they were non-conforming, or whatever the term is, legal non-conforming structures? If they were built without a permit because a permit wasn't needed, is it really enforcing the zoning code to say now that they would need to be removed, that they were allowed use back when they were built? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a, Yeah, that's
Then you
clever.
say a literal enforcement of the terms of the zoning code would mean they don't have a problem
So it's
because
not
these
even
are,
that difficult.
But then they still couldn't have that Rubbermaid shed, because then they'd still be at 3 at that point. The 2 would be okay.
yeah, right.
Grandfathered.
Yeah, the
You still
Rubbermaid
have
shed
an-
is
You
a
still have an
little
issue then.
problematic, but
Yeah.
I mean, an enforcement of the zoning code would be to say that it's allowed. But we are saying that they were built and didn't need a permit, or there's no evidence to contradict that.
yeah, I mean, that's where it gets into almost like we're saying, well, they don't even need a variance. Why are you asking for a variance? You shouldn't need one, but that's not for us to decide.
Right.
You know, it's already been decided that, you know, they do need a variance if they want to keep the sheds.
Right, but then so, yeah, does that give us any leeway on saying that this isn't that even if we don't think there's practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship, does that give us any leeway in saying, well, this isn't really a literal enforcement? So we can answer that question that,
Well, it's kind of like this interpretation of a literal enforcement of the zoning code would result in unnecessary hardship caused by, you know, interpreting the zoning code in that manner when we don't have the full facts of what the code was, you know, back in the 80s.
mm-hmm.
Just have the testimony to go on, that the testimony was that they were built and didn't need a permit.
Right?
That's what
Right.
the testimony is, and there wasn't anything contradicting that.
Right.
No, that's the same thing I've heard. I've lived here my whole life, and that's the same thing I've always heard. Back then, if it wasn't on a slab, it was what it was, you know? Not saying that's right or wrong, but
That is the biggest key in my mind, is whether these were needing a permit or not, because if they weren't needing a permit, then all this is not required.
Right.
So the hardship, our actual zoning ordinance, not the zoning, in the section of the Village Code 1752 that creates the Board of Zoning Appeals, what it says, and it's not exactly what 5 says, what it says is no variance shall be granted solely on the basis of economic gain or loss. Self-imposed hardships shall not be considered as grounds for the granting of a variance. So that's why we've said money doesn't matter. But this says no variance shall be granted solely on the basis of economic gain. And it does seem to me, at least, you can make the argument that it may be unnecessary hardship to deprive them of what would just be sort of I'm not talking about money, just to deprive them of this grandfather effect. That's it's to take away something that a right that other people would get is a hardship to me, irrespective of the money. You could at least make the argument.
It's the whole argument on the fact that they did not need permits when they were built.
Yeah. Yep. Which we don't know for sure, but yeah, that's all we've got, right? That's all the evidence we have before us.
I mean,
Move to say what?
yeah, because maybe the hardship on them would be they could walk away then feeling like now they have to go research what the code was back in 1980 and, you know, that would be a hardship.
Yeah. Well, I think that our actual authority under the ordinance is slightly different than what finding 5 says. And I don't think we are granting a without regard to answering that question, I don't think that if we were to grant a variance, we're granting it solely on the basis of economic gain or loss. And that I don't think we would be granting it, that we would be considering self-imposed hardship. I don't think we're saying that. And so I think maybe our finding of fact form is just a little different in this case. It doesn't meet the actual authority from the, the authority we're granted under the ordinance. So, all right. So then I guess I could live with, would result.
Same here.
All right. All right. Does somebody have, why don't Mr. Hanson, you phrase the motion for us? Well, you don't have to. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do I need to specifically read?
I think well, go
I'm
ahead.
going to make a motion and then choose whether we want.
Okay.
So my motion is that we grant the variance to exceed the maximum. Well, my motion is to grant the variance to exceed the maximum number of detached accessory buildings allowed in the RS4 single-family residence district. What it is.
Yeah, the way I would phrase it is we grant the variance to exceed the maximum number of permitted accessory buildings in this, or this particular lot by 1 to allow the 12 by 16 wooden shed and the 22 by 14 lean-to.
Because the wood shed would be the originally allowed use, and then
Yep.
the lean-to would be the extra one. So,
Yep.
all right, so make a motion to grant the variance requesting one additional detached building in the RS4 single-family residential district.
I'll second the motion.
Well, let me just make sure that I understand the motion. I mean, so if they tear down the lean-to, can they build something else instead? Are we giving them carte blanche to have 2 buildings, or are we giving them the ability to have these 2 buildings?
Giving them the ability to have one more building.
Are we?
Actually, 2, I guess. Is what we're saying.
A total of 2. Doesn't have to be these 2.
So they could tear them down and build 2 different buildings.
As long as they don't exceed the 800 and whatever feet.
Or do we want to say at the end of your motion to say to apply to the existing 12 by 16 and 22 by 14?
Yeah, if the motion is to allow them to have any 2 buildings, because the only reason I would vote for it is because these 2 were existing. I wouldn't let.
Could we specifically say which ones we're talking about?
I think so. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Say it.
I
I think so.
think that's, that I would vote for. I won't vote for 2, just any 2.
So my motion again.
Okay.
Take back my second.
So my motion is to grant the variance requesting exceeding the maximum number of attached buildings allowed in the RS4 single family, specifically the 12 by 16 wooden shed and the 22 by 14 foot lean-to.
I will second that motion. All right, the motion having been made and seconded, if you would please call the vote.
Member Hanson? Chairman White?
Aye.
Member Tim Edwards?
Aye.
Member Huber?
Aye.
And Member Shadron?
Aye. All right, Mr. and Mrs. Keymichael, we take this very seriously, as you can see, and our power is limited. We didn't think we could do anything, as you could hear, about the Rubbermaid shed. I'm surprised that that requires anything. We may try to provide some guidance to, the village board, maybe about some change that one shouldn't maybe need a building permit to snap together pieces of plastic. But based on what we believe to be our authority, we have granted your request for a variance in part and denied it in part. You'll get in the mail a form. There is a process where you can appeal our decision to the circuit court. But in the meantime, at least you get to keep the woodshed and the lean-to. Sure. All right. Does anybody want to take just a 2 or 3 minute break? No?
Sure.
Yes?
But
No?
you-
No? Yes?
I don't need to, but.
Okay. Let's move on then, as long as nobody needs a break, to our next hearing. The purpose of this hearing will be to hear any and all parties, their attorneys or agents for or against a variance appeal filed by John Wesky, property owner, North 104 West 20255 Willow Creek Road, Colgate, who is requesting a variance from Section 17.411B of the Village Zoning Code to A, exceed the maximum area allowed for detached accessory buildings in the RS4 single-family residential district by 337 square feet. B, to exceed the maximum number of detached accessory buildings allowed in the RS4 single-family residential district. And C, exceed the maximum number of attached garages in the RS4 single-family residential district. All right. Mr. Wesky, we know you are here. Again, same kind of deal. You went through one of these, so maybe you want to go first. It's up to you. But if you want Mr. Retzloff or Ms. Zant to do like they did before, the presentation with the pictures, and then they'll tell us what the issues are, and then you'll get to speak to. And now that you've seen our deliberations, you know the things that we struggle with. So those are the issues to focus on. All right, Mr. Retzloff, I'll remind you, you are still under oath,
Yes,
as they like to say.
so noted. The Weskys were issued a code violation notice back in January of this year following a complaint investigation into an outdoor wood furnace. As a result of that investigation, code violation notice was issued concerning the outdoor wood furnace, as well as some accessory buildings and an attached garage. The outdoor wood furnace item, the code violation notice is a building code violation and not a zoning code violation. And that provision in the building code specifically provided the village board the opportunity to consider a variance request from that particular provision. So that item is not before the Board of Zoning Appeals this evening. Only the accessory building code violations and the attached garage code violation that we'll detail shortly. The Wesky property is located on Willow Creek Road in the same neighborhood as the Key Michael property, as you probably have gathered by this point. It is also zoned RS4, single family. The RS4 single family district allows one attached garage. The Weskys have two. The RS4 district allows one detached accessory building. The Weskys have four. The RS4 district allows a total accessory building area of 1% of the property size. In this case, it's a 0.72 acre parcel. 1% allows 313 total square feet of accessory building area. The four buildings that the Weskys have total 800 square feet. There's another aerial view of the site, looking from the northwest downward towards the southeast. To give you a feel for the buildings in the neighborhood, similar to the aerial photo you saw earlier this evening. There's a portion of a survey for the Wesky property, property highlighted in red with the building locations noted. The existing accessory buildings, again, there's a 10 by 12, a garden shed, a 10 by 20 metal lean-to, a 20 by 24 Quonset hut style structure, and a 4 by 8 chicken coop totaling 800 square feet. Again, there are 3 variances that the Weskys are seeking. One, to exceed the maximum number of accessory buildings allowed in an RS4 district by a total of 3. Although if you consider they offer to remove the chicken coop, then they're only looking for a variance for 2 buildings. The variance appeal to exceed the maximum total area allowed for accessory buildings in an RS4 district by 487 square feet. The difference between the 800 square foot existing minus the 313 square foot allowed is the 487 square foot exceedance or variance amount, if you will. And finally, to exceed the maximum number of attached garages allowed in an RS4 district by 1 attached garage. I would say that we, in the course of our investigation, discovered that none of the structures that were constructed or installed on the property, including the attached garage, were permitted. I think I mentioned that the Weskys had offered to voluntarily remove the chicken coop, so that should probably be discussed at some point as well.
All right.
With that, I have no further information.
Tell me again, I want to make sure I understand. So we've got 800 square feet of buildings, accessory buildings. If we remove the chicken coop, that's 32 feet, so we're down to 768, right? And what is allowed?
313.
Okay.
1% of the parcel size, 0.72 acres.
Right. So in the requested variance, it says exceed the maximum area allowed for detached accessory buildings in the RS4 residential district by 337 feet. That's not correct.
That's not correct.
Okay.
The notice was published prior to receiving more detailed information from the Weskys concerning the actual dimensions of the structures.
Okay.
The earlier figure was based on an estimate of the.
That's fine. I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding the math and the numbers. So, okay, I got it. All right. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Retzloff at this time? Go ahead.
Looking at the list of the structures that were built, looks like the wood garden shed with the gable roof was built in 1970 or before 1970.
Our information indicates sometime before 1970.
So kind of like the questions before, there's no evidence that they needed a permit to build that building?
Well, I don't want to misconstrue what was said as part of another hearing, but my statement that it was conceivable that a permit wasn't required pertained to, my understanding of the question had to do with the lean-to structure on the other property that might not have been required to get a permit because it wasn't considered to be a building per se by my predecessor. That doesn't necessarily mean the code didn't require a building permit for an accessory building. They just might have interpreted it as not being an accessory building.
Because of the type of the building.
Because of the type of the construction, no sides. Originally it was a roof and some posts, and then sides were added. I think, but again, I don't want to confuse a previous hearing with this one.
So that because this is all in the forefront of our mind based on our previous
Yeah.
on our previous hearing, let me ask, would there be any reason in your mind to think that any previous zoning administrator might not have considered a wood garden shed with a gable roof to be an accessory building that would require a building permit?
I would it's likely that any of my predecessors would have required a building permit for a wood shed.
Okay.
As an accessory building.
Okay. Yeah, that was my question. Anything else for Mr. Ritzloff right now?
I do have
Go
a
ahead.
question. So I just wanted to ask about the two attached garages. So I assume there's maybe one on either end of the house. Is that correct? And that's not allowed per RS4 zoning?
Legally, that's correct. You're allowed one attached garage in the RS4 district as specified in that accessory building portion of the code that was handed out earlier. It's our understanding that Mr. Wesky constructed an addition to the dwelling for that attached garage and didn't obtain any permits for that.
So I mean, I have seen some newer homes built with two separate attached garages in RS4. Wondering how they were able to do that. There's some in the Kinderberg Estates area. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I wonder how they're able to do that. Just an unusual design where there's literally two separate garages on
I was
one
thinking the same
house.
thing.
I don't know if you've driven
I
past
walk
that.
through there every day.
I
Yep.
thought it's a strange layout on some of the houses, but they do have
I've not
two,
seen that. Ah,
yeah. Two garages, like literally on one end of the house and on the other. Like, you know, a 2-car garage here and a 1-car garage there.
I've seen them when they're like adjacent to each other, but I would think that would be one garage. Is that how, what makes them two? Is that they're, instead of
They're
like
not
a 4-car
adjoining?
garage, or is it that they're not touching?
Right. I mean,
see.
the kind I think you're describing where there's two separate doors and there's a clear dividing point between the two. The space behind it is effectively treated as one garage. But I think
But this is where it's on, you know, the other
I'm
end of the
not
house.
familiar with that.
Yeah, these are very clearly two separate garages, both attached.
Yeah,
Well,
maybe there's a violation to
You
look
see that?
into. Yes.
all right, anything else? Do we have a picture of the garages, any chance? I looked through here, I couldn't, from my photocopy that I printed, I don't have a good picture.
Which side is it? Is it on the east? The east end of the building is.
Okay, yeah, all right. All right. All right, okay. Everybody, any more questions for Mr. Retzloff right now? All right. Mr. Wesky, if you would come up. I swore you in right before, right? All right, well then, I'll remind you that you're still under oath. All right, well, you saw what we deliberate over, so those are the things that are the considerations. So go ahead and tell us what you would like us to know.
Well, the chicken coop is gone. I don't care about that. We haven't
Okay.
had chickens in years. The brown shed or the gambrel roof shed in the back was put up in 69 when the house was built. By Pat Key Michael's uncle, who originally built the house. The other where it says sheds, there's that structure there that's 20 by 24. That's like galvanized pipe with fabric over it. It's
Okay.
not I guess you guys call it a building, but it's not on a foundation. It sits on the ground. If I wanted to, I could get 4 guys and move it over 3 feet or put it in another side of the yard, or I don't know, whatever. It's a definition, I guess.
Yeah.
The other shed that's 10 by 20 or whatever is made out of 4x6s, 2x4s, and it has metal like panels screwed on the outside, and I put firewood in it. Doesn't have a foundation, it's not in the ground, it's heavy, but I could
Mm-hmm.
move it around or whatever. And then the garage, the second garage on my home, there is a overhead garage door in the basement wall, the original basement wall. So you're gonna open that up and go into the basement of the house. There were block walls on footings there when I built the house, the concrete pavement, everything was there already, as well as the driveway,
Mm-hmm.
because I have driveway on either side. The door on the second garage faces the side yard, so from the front, it all looks like one house. And I built the walls on the block walls and put the roof on it. I did that myself. I'm thinking, I guess. Cause I'm a carpenter, so just built stuff. I didn't, there was no, setbacks for what they were, and the base was there, and I enclosed it.
Where on that diagram, and grab the microphone if you would. Where on the on the drawing are the two garages?
This is a overhead door here.
Okay.
The driveway going this way facing Willow Creek Road,
All right, yeah,
and then this portion right here.
I see.
So there's a window right here, there's a window in the back, and then there's an overhead door facing this way. And it's all siding and matches and soffit and everything, the roof, and this is actually at grade here, and then the floor in this is at grade with the basement floor in the house.
And then that second garage, that's the one that you said used to go to the basement or something?
This one does.
Oh.
Originally, there's an overhead door right here.
Oh.
There's concrete here and all the way out, and there's block walls down on 4 foot, down to footings, as a regular building would have. So that was all there, and I put some stud walls on here and a roof and a garage door. So
Right.
it still meets the setbacks to the side yard. So
I
originally,
see.
this lot went straight through like this. And then when I don't know at what point, when after the house was built, this portion here, this rectangle was added to this lot. I don't know if you can see if it has it on this picture, but it showed with a line where this was added to this. So there was a driveway here, and then you could go in here and open an overhead door and go into the basement.
Okay.
That overhead door is still there. It's gotta be from the early 70s. It's yellow and brown and made out of masonite. That's all original yet. So what I did was close it up so that it was, I guess, more space.
Yeah. How come you didn't get a building permit when you did that?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Most of it was there, and I put a roof on it and didn't do it.
Yeah, okay. I see.
The concrete comes out where here, I can show you here. This is the lower garage right here. So there's a driveway right here, asphalt driveway down to concrete approach. It's all concrete down to here and concrete all the way in, meets up with the basement. That was all there.
The second garage that what do you put in there? What do you keep in there?
There's like some materials and stuff from work that like rolls of coil and I don't know, like is in there, a couple gas cans and not too much.
Is it heated or anything?
It could be if I opened the inside garage door, the heat would go out there, but other than that,
I see, yeah.
I never took out that other garage door because I don't know, I just wanted to be able to separate it. So if I had a gas can in there or something like that, it's gotta be separate from the house.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Retzloff, if he removed that other door between this second garage and the that goes down to the basement. Would it still be a garage? I got to look up the definition of garage.
No, we actually, in a letter to Mr. Weskey, that was one of the suggestions to remedy the problem, was to convert it to not a garage.
Okay,
but
yeah.
hub the house.
I saw that, but I didn't understand at the time what, yeah, all right. Yeah, all right.
Arguably, yes. Now, I know I don't need to point this out, but the board does oversee interpretation of the code. So if the board doesn't agree with the zoning administrator's interpretation of what's a garage or what's not a garage, that's in your purview as well as part of this, so.
What if I took out the inside garage door and it was part of my basement? Could have a garage door in my living room if I wanted to, couldn't I?
There were, say there was existing walls, was it like retaining wall, like?
No, it's
Old mason?
cement block. Cement block built just like a basement wall, down to 4 foot of footing, concrete
And it
footing.
was open.
What's
Like,
that?
it was just like an open
Yeah,
area to covering or anything over it.
and they're straight up walls and then they step down. Yeah, there was nothing on it.
Theoretically, if we denied the variance on the attached garage, we could see this again if the decision was made to come up with a design that would convert it to a permitted use and then it was denied at the village and reapplied as a variance because of the interpretation of the design.
Do you ever park vehicles in there?
Never.
Hey, can you come back, Mr. Etzloff? I'm looking at the definitions in 17.08, and I don't see one that just says garage. I see one that says garage, comma, private. But it says the definition of garage, comma, private is a building or portion thereof used exclusively for parking or temporary storage of self-propelled vehicles, typically not exceeding 3 vehicles. I totally understand why you put a garage door on something that looks like a garage. It walks like a duck, you know, it's a duck, right? So I could see that, but if he doesn't park self-propelled vehicles in there, is it a garage?
I think it comes down to your one's interpretation. And strictly that language, could clearly argue, no, it's not a garage. If he hasn't and is not parking vehicles in it, I guess my interpretation is a little bit broader than that. It's not heated space. It's not part of the house right now. It's got a garage door on it in a more traditional and typical sense. So that's the definition. And granted, there's probably
Yeah.
a fine line.
What's the thinking, if you know, behind only having one attached garage to a house? Because I can imagine that these new houses that you guys are talking about, it probably looks kind of cool. What's any idea?
I believe when the code was changed to specifically quantify how many attached garages you can have, it was in result of a situation where a property owner, this is going back a little ways, was trying to build garage space on either side of a dwelling where there was accessibility from both the front and then back around to the rear. It was to house a car collection is what it
Okay,
amounted to. And originally the codes said it could have a garage. And the individual constructed it in such a way where garage doors and the support structure for garage, your typical sliding multi-paneled garage door, they were installed, but on one side of this house in these garages, these sort of fake walls were installed. And it was in an attempt, it was a ruse, if you will, to trick the village and the building inspector. And at the time, there was a statement made to another inspector that once the certificate of occupancy was issued, the fake walls were coming down and the garage doors would be installed and rolled out, all in an effort to circumvent the language that only allowed a garage. So because of that, we had to go to the extent of clearly, again, saying hot coffee can burn you kind of a thing, that your A means one, unless you're in these zoning districts. And there's a provision that says in certain zoning districts, you can have 2 attached garages. So that was the basis
I
for
see.
behind specifying the
Yeah.
number of attached garages.
So if, and I haven't come to this conclusion at all, but if I were to come to the conclusion that I don't think this may be a garage, he did it without a building permit, so he's still supposed to go get a building permit, right?
Arguably, yes.
And if he were to do that, then zoning might say, aha, it's a garage. Because if I were to conclude it's not a garage today, I would conclude he doesn't need a variance. But we haven't, and zoning's interpretation of the code may be that it is a garage.
Right.
But we haven't noticed a hearing we can't hold a hearing on interpretation of the zoning code today because it hasn't been noticed for that, right? And you haven't made that determination, right?
The challenge isn't my interpretation of whether it is or isn't a garage. That's true. And I certainly can't tell you how to, the rules
Right.
of your operation.
Right.
But it would seem in the course of in investigating and acting on a variance, if you don't agree with my interpretation, I don't know that we have to specially cite that in a notice per se, but if you feel compelled, we could do that.
So it would seem to me it makes it that if the question turns on whether he parks vehicles in there, if I give him a variance, now he can park vehicles in there. But if I say it's not a garage and he doesn't need a variance, he can't park vehicles in there and it's not a garage until, unless you guys say it is a garage. I guess you've already said it's a garage.
We've
You've
said
decided
for
it's a
this,
garage, okay.
yes.
All right. I think I got it.
So you're either denying or granting the variance. The variance is requesting that it's a second attached garage, so.
Right.
We're either saying, yes, you can have a second attached garage, or we're saying no, and if we say no, then he says, if we say it's not a garage, we say no, and then he can apply for a building permit that it's not a garage and make sure that it's designed to not be a garage.
Well, could I interject? I have to say, in all fairness to the property owner, since they don't deal in the zoning and interpretation of the code on a daily basis, maybe he does it for fun, but it's my understanding that his appeal for a variance was based on what we pointed out in
Right.
our code violation. So we say you have a second garage.
Right.
He's going to say, I need a variance for a second garage.
Right.
If he understood the code to be different and maybe, in the conversation with an attorney or somebody else came to the conclusion that maybe it's an interpretation issue, they would have challenged or filed
Right.
specifically for a different variance. I don't know. All I'm saying is because this is purely selfish from my perspective, because these meetings run long and we don't want to come back every time just because we misadvertised what might have been a more logical appeal by the property owner. I don't want to penalize him by saying he's got to go back through the process again, just
no.
to challenge the interpretation.
Oh, we wouldn't
So-
do that. We wouldn't do that. Let me ask you this, Mr. Wesky, that there may be 2 ways for, at least on this garage issue, to approach this. The one way would be for your request for a variance. And if we were to grant that variance, then you can use this space as a garage, because now you're permitted to use a garage, so you can park vehicles in there. The other approach would be for you to make the argument, or maybe, that I don't think it falls within that definition of a garage. Sure, it's got a garage door on it, but I don't use it to park vehicles. It's not a garage. So I only got one garage. I only got one place I park vehicles. In which case you wouldn't need a variance, but you couldn't park vehicles there. And so really that it's up to you. If you, I mean, I suppose you could go ahead with your variance request and if it's granted, great. If it's denied, then you still just, I mean, were you cited for, what are you supposed to do in response to the notice of code violation?
Get it,
What's that?
get a variance or.
remove
take it
the,
off or
yeah.
whatever. It's part of my house. It's built on.
Mr. Retzlaff provided the options, and one was to
Yeah.
convert the garage to living quarters, so if the variance is denied, that's an option to rectify the situation.
But then we've never really addressed the question of whether it's really a garage. And
Well,
Mr.
it's set
Retzlaff's
up-
point is we should just decide that today. And I don't know if we can. He's not making the argument. I don't know if he even wants to challenge that. But one of the things that we do as the Board of Zoning Appeals is to review interpretations of the zoning code. So but on the form that he fills out, there's a box, he checks either a request for a variance or request for interpretation, and our findings of fact are different. And I just wonder if, having not been noticed for, if that's an issue that we can properly take up. But I don't know. I just don't know. And maybe we can only handle the variance request. Yeah, I would kind of think not. But maybe we can only, so we can certainly handle the variance request, I guess. But to Mr. Retzlaff's point, I mean, we certainly don't want Mr. Weskey to have to file another appeal because it costs like $450 or $500 to file these things. And what is it?
I don't know what it was, 570?
Yeah,
Something like
okay,
that.
yeah, it's a lot. So,
If you file the building permit without any structural changes, I think, if you file a permit with some structural changes to convert to living quarters, well, then that's something different in my mind.
yes, right, but
You're actively trying to convert it to a living space.
right, yes. But I mean, just leaving it like it is. And just saying,
Be an issue where I suspect Mr. Retzlaff would deny it.
well, right, no, what he would have to do then is appeal Mr. Retzlaff's determination that this is a garage based on the definition that I read, because he doesn't park vehicles in there. And we would be the people who would decide if it's a garage or not. So that would be a way that we could determine that there was no violation of the that this garage does or does not violate the ordinance, but he hasn't requested that. And so I don't think that that's a way, I don't think we can do that. And it would seem to me that it would seem to me all apologies to Mr. Retzlaff, because I do know these run late and we labor over these decisions. It's not easy. But it would seem to me, at least with respect to the garage issue, what proper procedure, if Mr. Weskey wanted to make the argument that this just isn't a garage, would be to file an amended appeal that also requests determination of whether, you wouldn't have to file a new filing fee, but you'd file more paperwork. We'd have to adjourn this hearing and you'd have to come back on some other night. But I don't think we can decide that issue tonight, whether it's a garage or not. And we would have to look at it. We don't, I mean, I just pulled up the definition. I don't know if that's, and it says garage private. I don't even know if that's the only definition of garage. But it might be. And so if we were to grant your variance tonight, if you go ahead with your variance request, we grant it on the garage, you're fine. We deny it on the garage, you might still have the argument that it isn't really a garage, but then you, at that point, you would have to file a new one. And that would require another filing fee, and it would require, still require coming back. So if you wanted to make that argument, it would, I think procedurally, would be the proper way to do it. So it's entirely up to you.
So I have to take back my request for a variance and you wouldn't.
No, what you would do is, no, you would just request both. So you'd file an amended notice of appeal. And you would also check box A and say that you're appealing the interpretation that it's a garage. If you want to do that, if you think you can, and I don't know, I'm not giving you any advice. I'm just telling you that I think that's the only way we can consider the question of whether this structure that you don't park vehicles in constitutes a garage or not.
Okay.
It sound right? I mean, I know it's inefficient, and it may not even be the proper, there may be an easier way to do it, but I don't know what that is. So it's up to you. We can certainly proceed with your request for a variance on all of these items.
And if we do that,
If you want.
then I have to file a separate.
I would think so.
Over,
Yeah,
so
I would think so.
here.
I would think so. Yep. I mean, yes, I know so. This will be the end of that, and unless, if we grant the variance, you don't need to. And then you would have the right to park vehicles in there, because you would have a determination that you could have 2 attached garages.
Yeah.
But if we deny your variance, then, yeah, then in order to make the argument that it's a garage, I think you'd have to start over.
Or just
Yeah, I could do that too.
change course and decide to structurally change it.
Yeah.
Meet the definition Mr. Retzloff had, or a suggestion in his.
Yeah, it's just anything that's in there, I could carry down the stairs. I'd rather not carry it on a garage door. It's just a lot easier than.
Well, yeah, so right, so then it's up to you. So if you proceed and we deny it, if you've got a plan B that is sufficiently satisfactory to you, then, I mean, we're all here and we can go ahead.
Because we still got to go over the rest of the stuff, right?
Still got to go over the rest of the stuff, yep.
I might as well do it.
What's that?
Might as well do it then.
Okay. Yep, so we'll proceed with the variance.
Sure.
Okay. All right. We were talking about the garages. He told us that the original garden shed was built before 1970. Both the Quonset style hut and the lean-to are not affixed to the ground. Quonset hut just has fabric over it.
And the chicken coop is already removed?
No, I didn't,
But
have
agreed
a
to
skid
remove.
loader available to get it out of there. It's just laying on the ground on 4x4.
Yeah.
But if I get 6 guys, I could move it too.
All right. People have questions for Mr. Wesky?
Everything is a storage, I mean, 20 by 24 foot Quonset hut, is that full of?
I had a camper and I had a boat in there and they're both gone. I got a couple windows in there and I got, I fixed up the tractor. Like, thing that goes in your trailer hitch for all the stuff around, there's not much, it's just gravel on the floor and it's, like a galvanized pipe frame thing, and it just sits there.
You said the lean-to is the woodshed?
Well, I don't really have a lean-to, it's just a wood box with some metal screwed on the outside of it. It's for, strictly for throwing firewood in and keep it dry.
Does it have a roof? It has a roof, right?
Yeah, there's a top on it.
Yeah.
Otherwise it wouldn't keep wood dry.
I asked this at a prior hearing, you probably heard. Is there anything unique you want to tell us about your property that requires, something about the land that requires you to have these accessory buildings the way that you do?
Well, the fabric top shed I put up, I think in, must be like 05. Something, I don't recall exactly. But I wanted to build an outbuilding and they said it could be like 300 some feet and that didn't do me much good. So I looked for alternatives and this type of thing was not considered permanent structure. So that's why I bought it. I would have never wanted anything like that, but I did it because it was allowed.
And when was that?
I want to say it's like 05. I have it in a letter. I don't remember exactly.
So someone gave you the advice that it was allowed?
Yeah, the village did.
The village did?
Because I was going, well, there wasn't, they didn't say you can do it, you can't do it. But I couldn't construct a permanent structure above whatever it is, 300 and whatever square feet it was, and I couldn't get my camper in there, I couldn't, whatever, that's a lawnmower and a snow blower, you know? So this was a thing that I would get catalogs all the time in the mail for this kind of stuff, and I like, well, maybe I'll check into this, and I checked in with it, and they said, there's nothing about that, like, we don't, it's not a permanent structure, cause it wasn't like in the ground or fixed to the ground or whatever, so I ordered one, I put it up, and it's been there ever since. And then I found out it wasn't supposed to be there, but if the rules changed along the way or whatever happened, I don't know, but
But you had a letter from someone in the village who said?
letter, but I was in here.
Oh, they just told
talking to
you?
them, yeah,
Okay.
and I just said, well, there's no rule about it. Why would they lie to me? Well, that's what I got. It's
Yeah.
not the greatest thing. It's, you know, it's not like a wood structure with a shingle roof and whatever, but
Right.
it's not stuff laying in the backyard either.
If you would have to take it down, is it really, you said you don't have to go to your camper there any longer?
I can figure it out, but there's a big hole in the ground at the yard slopes down like this and I dug it out, got rid of the fill and whatever. I suppose I could find fill to make it work, but it's not I mean, it's not gonna kill me, but I didn't want to.
Okay. Anybody else? Any questions for Mr. Weskey? Yeah?
The woodshed is there to keep my wood dry that I use to heat my house. If I didn't have dry wood, it wouldn't be any good. But that's the only reason it's there. Not that I parked something in it, not that I wanted to build it or wanted another building or anything like that. It was purely out of necessity.
Is is that the only way you heat your house?
No,
With wood? Okay, so you've got gas or?
I got a boiler, yeah, but
okay.
I've been doing that since. Remember, again, that's in the letter, but probably like 17 years or 18 years or something like that.
All right. Anybody else with any questions? Mr. Weskey? Any other questions for Mr. Retzlaff? No? All right, is there anybody here that wishes to speak in favor of the requested variance? Good. Welcome back. You're still under oath. But if you would state your name and address for our record. please.
Patrick Key Michael, North 104, West 20355 Willow Creek Road, Colgate 53017.
Thank you. What would you like to tell us?
His garage is going, I don't know if it matters anymore, but it's so small, that part that you call a garage, I don't think you could even pull a car in and get out of a door in there if you wanted to call it a garage. You know, maybe he should get some pictures and show you guys, but to me, I wouldn't consider that a garage. It's
You mean like the width of it is narrow?
It's
Yeah.
pretty narrow.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I get it.
I don't know, if you wanted to, could you even drive a truck all the way in there? I don't think you could. You'd have to. Oh. Yeah,
Yeah.
so whatever your definition is, but
Yeah.
I guess you could pull in and sit there.
All right.
As far as everything else, what John said, I know to be true, that that shed was there when my uncle built the house.
Okay.
And I don't have a problem with any of it, but my opinion doesn't matter. I know that you guys have to.
Yeah, well, no, well, you're a neighbor, so it's one of the things we consider. If you had said that, it was a detriment, it'd be something we'd consider. You're still under oath?
Yes, I am.
Please state your
Brett
name again.
That's North 104, West 20295 Will Creek Road, Colgate 53017.
Thanks, Will.
As far as everything, I don't have an issue. John's been a great neighbor and everything, so yes, there's no issues with any of the sheds or anything on both sides. So
Okay.
I'm caught in between, so I would have an issue, but there isn't any.
Great, thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak in favor of the requested variance? Come on up. Ms.
And Kelly Key Michael, I live at North 104, West 20355, Willow Creek Road, Colgate, Wisconsin 53017.
And you're still under oath.
And I'm still under oath. And I think what John failed to mention was that if you look at the topography of his lot, that there's quite a slope in the backyard. The structure that he has with the metal and the cloth, it's a tent, literally a tent. It's green. It really does blend in with the trees quite nicely. You can't even see it in that picture, but it's there. So it really is no problem, but there is quite a slope. And in the middle of his backyard, there is this septic system. And so that also I think is unique. It's hard to really configure where he would put any other sheds because his property is unique in that way. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Is
Sure.
there anyone that wishes to speak anyone else wishes to speak in favor? Come on up. And you are not under oath, but you will be soon.
Okay.
Do solemnly swear testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
All right, will you please state your name and address for our record?
My name is Sharon Bay. My address is N104 W20387 Willow Creek Road. I'm 2 houses down from John. And I've lived there since 1989 and none of that bothers me. I can't see it and he's a good neighbor and it doesn't bother me. Everybody gets along with it.
Okay. Great, thank you. Anyone else that wishes to speak in favor of the requested variance? Anyone that wishes to speak in opposition to the requested variance? Anyone who wishes to be heard speaking neither in favor nor against the requested variance? Online, I assume. Okay. All right. Anyone else have any final questions for either Mr. Wesky or our administrator? No? Okay. All right, Mr. Wesky, this is the point, as you see how these things go, where I close the hearing and then we begin our deliberation. So this is, if there's any last thing that you've thought of, anything that you want to tell us before we close the hearing and make our decision, this would be the time. Okay. Thank you. I'll declare the hearing closed. We can begin our deliberations. As we always do, we have to decide. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to break these into 3 requests. So, because there are three requested variances. The first is to exceed the number of permitted structures. I think I think the homeowner has conceded, he's getting rid of the chicken coop. So he's looking to exceed the number by 2. He wants a total of 3, right? He wants,
By 3.
well, that was with the coop.
Okay, so
Yeah, so it's gonna be by 2. Because he's gonna get rid of the coop. So we're not gonna even we're not gonna, if we were to grant a variance, he doesn't get to keep the coop. He's got to remove the coop, right? Because he said he would. So, all right, so that's our first requested variance. The second one is to exceed the maximum allowed square footage, and then the last one is to permit a second attached garage. So variance request number 1, to exceed the number of permitted accessory buildings. The first consideration is whether it will, or granting the variance would or would not be contrary to the public interest or in accord with the spirit of the zoning code.
So I'm just wondering if we should consider 1 and 2 kind of together, because it seems like the same factors would apply. Would that be appropriate to go through the 5
Maybe.
criteria combined?
Yeah, we probably can. And then I think the motion, I think we may have to have 3 separate motions, but I think, yeah, you're right. I think that will streamline this process. So, yeah, you're exactly right. So to exceed the number of accessory buildings, both in number and in square footage. Do we think that is or is not contrary to the public interest, and whether it is or is not in accord with the spirit of the zoning code?
So reading the staff comment again on this. So no permits were pulled. So regardless of the decision, they would want permits to be pulled.
Yeah.
Thinking again when these were built.
The main one was in the 70s. Other 2, Mr. Wesky built, he was thinking early 2000s, mid 2000s maybe.
Says although on bottom of the first page of the village letter, it says although the wood garden shed, and it says chicken coop, but for the purpose of the variance were requested, although the wood garden shed was constructed prior to current code requirements, there's no evidence that zoning or building permits were ever issued for these buildings. No evidence that the buildings are legally non-conforming. So it seems to be a statement that we need to consider. So if they were constructed prior to code requirements.
Current code requirements, yeah.
Right.
And it's kind of the same issue that we had last time, I think, and right, no permits.
But there was only
Is
1.
that he thought that based on the structure of the wood shed, that the prior administrator would have required a zoning or a building permit.
That's what Mr. Retzloff said, that he thought that. Mr. Wesky said that at least with respect to the Quonset hut style storage structure, he was told he didn't need that he didn't need a permit because it was temporary. That was 2007 or 2008. What I do know is that we cannot base our decision on, the law says we're not allowed to base our decision on, you told me you could do it.
There's been case law that we were presented with that.
Yep, that Brian, when Brian Sadak, gave us our, yep, right. He's the village attorney. So, sort of, well, all right, but spirit of the zoning code. So what we've got is three buildings once we get rid of the chicken coop, and we've got 800 or maybe 768. Yeah. Yeah, oh, yeah, almost. So whether that's in the spirit of the zoning code.
Code, you know, it goes by a percentage, so it's percent of the lot. I'd have an easier time if it was closer to the permitted area.
Yeah. Or if, right, or if the lot was really big. Because then it'd be closer to the, yeah, yeah. Now they do kind of, it blends in, I guess, so it's not unsightly, but having 3 instead of 1 is, you know, more significant to me than having 2 instead of 1. Because that's kind of the point, right? There's a limited number so that they're not just kind of all over the place. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's tough to say, you know, because the spirit of the zoning code is to just not have it look like you've got buildings all over the
Right.
place, of course. But these aren't visible from the road and the neighbors
True.
don't have a problem with it.
The code, of course.
Right,
Interpreting it.
right.
Code would say what a permanent structure is, I mean, that Quonset hut is, it hasn't frankly blown away in some of the windstorms we've had lately. Be nice to have a little more definition on that.
But what Mr. Retzloff told us today was that, yeah, now you can get a permit for a temporary structure, but then it's got a duration. It has it's a certain amount of time period. That's what makes it temporary, not how sturdy it is. Right, yeah. So, I don't know. I see both sides on that one. I think.
Will not, but will not on the second one too.
Not contrary to public interest and not and not in accord with the spirit of zoning code. Yeah, my instinct, and a zoning code is it's too much, too big. Whether there are or are not exceptional, extraordinary, or unusual conditions or circumstances that apply specifically to this lot, parcel, structure, or use that don't apply generally to other lots in the same district. Well, with respect to the main shed, we think that was built so long ago, although that's his, right? That's his one, so he can keep
Yeah,
that, he can
that
keep
one,
that one.
the only
right.
problem is maybe they didn't get a permit back
Right.
before 1970, but it's still
Right.
okay. It's the
It's
first
these
one.
other two- It's these other 2 structures and whether there's anything unique about the land. Now, there was some testimony that his lot slopes in the back, but there still isn't, you know, any requirement that you have, you know, I mean, there isn't
I've had cases where there were wetlands on property and things like that, and it doesn't seem like that's the case here. It's just it's a slope.
There's also testimony that there's a septic system on there, but I'm not sure that that's extremely unique, given that that area is not fed by sewer. So there's likely to be other houses that have that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Now, is that a consensus on that one? Seems like it.
I
yeah.
think so. I mean,
Yeah.
I haven't really heard of any exceptional.
3, whether that's necessary, whether the variance is or is not necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights possessed by others. So it's, you know, storing his wood and storing what used to be boat and other cool stuff. It isn't there anymore. I mean, we've had those cases before and we've read those, we in our training, we saw the real court cases about how, you know, a growing family that wants, you know, more space, that doesn't, you have to have more toys, that doesn't count.
Yep.
So I don't see that one either. Will or will not create substantial detriment to adjacent property owners? I do not think it will. I think it would not create any And practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship, which isn't, again, exactly the standard, but I mean, if we said that he can't have the Quonset style hut and the other 2x6 or whatever that the thing was, structure he built, is that unnecessary hardship or practical difficulty? I don't know.
But isn't it also self-imposed?
Oh,
You say.
Yeah,
good question.
yes.
And then you
Good
want to
point.
put a structure over it, is that considered as self-imposed?
yeah.
If you buy a motor home or you buy something that's large and
Yeah.
some kind of shelter for it.
Square footage of every building.
It's controlling that.
So that's the tier two. Oh, the square footage are listed there.
It's a nice room.
Yep.
The shed, the garden shed is, oh no, these may not be. Looks like the garden shed is 150 square feet. Oh yeah, here we go.
Yep. And that was the pre-1971
Yeah.
that was the original.
Get his pick which one he wants to keep.
Yeah, I guess so.
Say that again? Extend it. She's allowed 313. So it would be at 320. Take up these two, so just extend it 7 feet. 7 square feet.
I think just because it feels like the self-imposed, I'm having a hard time coming up with a practical difficulty.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's always a sort of a difficulty or a hardship if somebody's done something that wasn't allowed and now they have to undo it. But
Right.
that applies to everything that comes before us, just
Right.
about.
Right? Right.
But also had an opportunity to get permits and didn't. I think that's where like the self-imposed comes. Had you gotten permit, was approved, you wouldn't be here.
Right. Or you would have learned in trying to get the permit,
Yeah.
what was allowed.
Yep. Yep. All right. So I think we have a consensus on that one. Let's do the attached garage. And I don't, what's that?
You want to do a motion on these first? We need two motions, or can you do a motion to combine them?
I think we should do them separately, because I think that,
Each one to have its own.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, because that if it were to be denied and or if it were granted, either party has a right to appeal, and in order for the appeal to be able to appeal that which you actually, they may only want to appeal one, the number or size. And so they may think our findings are wrong on one, but not the other. So yeah, I think we should do those separately.
So then I guess I'll make a motion to deny the request for a variance to exceed the maximum number of accessory buildings allowed in an RS4 district.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, the motion to deny the requested variance as it relates to exceeding the number of accessory buildings having been made and seconded, if you would be kind enough to call the vote.
Member Huber,
Aye.
Member Hanson, Member Edwards,
Aye.
Member Shedrun, Chairman White.
Aye. The, that requested variance is denied. For a motion with respect to the exceeding the number of square feet.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to deny the request for variance to exceed the maximum total area allowed for accessory buildings in an RS4.
Second.
The motion to deny having been made and seconded, if you'll call the roll again, a vote in favor of the motion is a vote to deny the requested variance with respect to exceeding the square footage.
Member Huber, Member Shedrun, Member Edwards, Member Hanson, Chairman White.
Aye. The request to exceed the permitted square footage is denied. The final requested variance relates to the attached garage. Let's go back through our considerations for whether, this request assumes it's a garage, okay? So then the question is whether or not a variance will be contrary to public interest or will not be in accordance with the zoning code. What be contrary to that will? Yeah, I don't have
Yeah.
a problem with it.
Definitely not contrary to the public
Right.
interest,
Uh-uh.
in accord with the spirit of the zoning code.
Mr. Retzloff told us a bit about, people trying to have, come at it from both ends and this isn't
Yeah, they're
bad.
not
He just
interested
kind
in
of
something like
enclosed it. He should have got a building permit, I suppose, but he just, it was already there mostly.
Vehicles are different, I think.
Right,
I'm not
yeah.
trying to-
No,
So I'm not sure he's.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, right. All right. So, yeah, I think, so we've got a consensus on that one, I think. Is there exceptional, extraordinary, unusual conditions that apply specifically to this lot or parcel that do not apply generally to other parcels? And in this respect, I mean, I kind of think there is in a way so you've got this, thing that goes down to the basement with a garage door on it. Now, you didn't have to enclose it, and that might come up later, but that is unique in a sense that my house doesn't have that. I wish it did. You know?
I gotta remember too, is if we grant the variance, we're allowing them to park vehicles in there because.
Right, we're saying he can have a second garage. We're saying that he can have, that whether this is or isn't a garage, he can have a second garage. Yeah.
So.
But I don't know, I can go with exceptional or extraordinary just because the house was so weird and before he enclosed it. Yeah.
He also.
I mean, because it's not like he just it's not just like he had a flat wall and he built a garage adjacent to it. He had this sort of sloping driveway that goes down to the basement and it already had the blocks, the foundation. And now we may get to the question of whether in closing it makes a difference. But that to me is exceptionally unique about the house that doesn't apply to other people that at least for this one, it's up to you guys. I mean, I'm not.
The driveway is self-imposed condition though, if you build a driveway to go down to that portion of the structure.
Well, that was already in the house when he bought it. Yeah. Yeah. So it was just a way to get stuff down into the basement. But it didn't have a garage until he put walls and a roof. And a garage door, yeah. But it did have an exterior garage door, yeah. That's now an interior garage door. Yeah. Yeah. We want to go on? All right. We have to decide whether the variance is or is not necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights possessed by other properties in the same district.
So you think about in the past when we've asked, are you able to occupy your property and live there in a way that conforms with the zoning? So I guess, are we saying that he has a right to build this garage in a way that doesn't comply with the zoning?
Right. And yeah, and that's the,
Like as a garage.
occupy it as a garage. That's right. That's right.
You grant the variance for it.
Yep. Does, right, does he have to have a second garage for the enjoyment of substantial property rights? Yeah, I think not. Right, I tend to agree. I'm still on the fence about whether it's a garage, but that's not our discussion for today. If we grant the variance, we're saying he can have a garage, and I don't know that he has, that it requires a garage for a second garage for to enjoy his property rights. The person who lived in the house before him didn't have a second garage. Well, but that goes down to the basement.
Basement.
Well, he still got that.
Yeah, that can remain, I guess. I guess that garage door can remain. It's just
Yeah.
what was built.
Yeah, I think is not necessary.
Variance will or will not create substantial detriment to adjacent property owners. I think there's any,
Not on both.
yeah, if there's no detriment to anybody. And a literal enforcement of the terms of the zoning code would or would not result in practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship to the applicant. Well, I mean, he's got the alternative, well, he's actually got two alternatives. He's got the alternative Mr. Retzloff proposed, which is to, you know, turn it into living space, or to maybe remove the internal garage door so that it functions as part of the living space, right? And that then makes it, Mr. Retzloff then is okay with it, because then it apparently isn't a garage. His other option is to argue that it isn't a garage. So by not granting the variance, we're not requiring him to tear anything down. We're not,
It would not, it's would not done.
yeah, unless, well, no, but we talked about that. I asked him about that. And I said, if he has another plan B, if he can live with, you know, maybe he can do something, because he's not storing stuff there. Maybe he can fashion it in a way that satisfies zoning, that he isn't using it as a garage, that he's using it as a living, that it's space of the dwelling. It's now part of the house. It's not an attached garage anymore. I don't know, maybe put a sofa and some pictures on them.
I also feel like the situation is self-imposed.
That's, you know, that's a good point, because, right, that's a good point, because again, number 5 doesn't read exactly like the code does. Your point is more along the lines of what the code actually says. And this is one, I think, where you probably can't make much of an argument that he shouldn't have pulled a permit. And if he had pulled a permit, somebody would have said you can't have a second garage. Yeah. All right. Well, then is there a motion on this one?
Motion to deny the variance exceed the maximum number of attached garages allowed in the RS4 district by one attached garage.
I'll second it.
The motion to deny having been made and seconded, again, a vote of an aye vote is a vote to deny the variance. If you would call the vote, please.
Member Hanson, Member Huber,
Aye.
Member Edwards,
Aye.
Member Shedrun, Chairman White.
Aye. The zoning staff has asked us, regardless of the variance decision, they request that we direct the property owner to obtain any and all necessary building permits. Does anyone have any thoughts, objections, direction? What's that? Yeah. I
Like a statement.
don't know that we have the power to require anybody to do anything. Right,
I think if we had granted it, it would make sense to say,
yeah.
you need to get
You would
the,
have a
Well,
building.
and as I look at our powers, I just don't know that we have the power to order anybody to do anything. Yeah,
Up with a different use and apply for a permit or
Right.
to demolish it or whatever. So the ball's back in the owner's court.
it's kind of what I think. Yeah, it's kind of what I think. Well, Mr. Wesky, we've unfortunately denied your requested variances. We do not enjoy this part of our service here. You will get a notice in the mail that tells you how to go about appealing to the circuit court, if you so choose. In addition, zoning administration believes that you need to apply for any and all necessary building permits. We do not believe that we have the power, particularly given our decision tonight, to order you to do that, but please be aware that zoning administration believes that that is necessary. So you might be well advised to decide for yourself whether that is something that you need or want to do. Thank you all. All right, our next, we have another hearing date, another hearing scheduled.
Currently, there's no meeting scheduled for July.
Right. With that, does anyone have a motion to adjourn? Well, is there any other business? Well, it's not a notice for anything, so we got no other business. Have a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.